Lana Turner. She was one of the most glamorous stars of the 40s and 50s, and her performances in The Postman Always Rings Twice, Imitation of Life, and The Bad and the Beautiful have forever guaranteed her a place in film history. But like so many others celebrated on this Walk of Fame, Lana watched her Hollywood dream turn into a personal nightmare of scandal and tragedy. On this episode of Mysteries and Scandals, we'll take a look back to that shocking night in 1958 when Lana, her real-life mobster boyfriend, and her frightened daughter all made headlines with one of Hollywood's most notorious crimes of passion. We'll talk with an eyewitness to the crime.
They're on the floor with Stompanato, dead, with a hole in them, and you could see daylight through it.
And we'll also hear from the scandal's major player, Lana's daughter, Cheryl Crane.
It's been a part of my life ever since it happened.
We'll relive the events from news footage.
I still never saw a blade. Mr. Stompanato grabbed himself here.
As well as never-before-seen photographs and reenactments. I'm A.J. Benza. Join me now for a stroll down the flip side of the Walk of Fame. MGM star Lana Turner died here in her 12-room Los Angeles condominium on June 30th, 1995, after a 4-year bout with throat cancer. She was 75. According to her wishes, the memorial for Lana Turner was very private and very quiet, exactly the opposite of how she lived her life. The press coverage following Turner's death spoke of her as show business royalty and noted that her passing brought an end to Hollywood's golden age. And like so many stars of that era, Turner's life had more scandal, melodrama, passion, and tragedy than any character she ever played in her 50-plus films. It began in her childhood and continued up until she was front-page news for The Murder of the 50s. The star herself described her life as a series of emergencies, and Turner biographer Edward Epstein agrees.
Lana led the kind of life that the writers of Melrose Place struggle to create. Lana lived her life the way she wanted to. She dated who she wanted to. She called a lot of the shots. Lana Turner's life was most certainly a series of emergencies, beginning with the death of her father when she was only 9 years old. Her father was a very dramatic guy. He had been a gambler. He met a violent death. Lana was old enough to understand it. She was 9 or 10 years old. People like to write that she was searching for her father for the rest of her life. She vehemently denied it.
Legendary Hollywood journalist Jim Bacon has a different take on Lana's early childhood.
I think the death of her father had a very traumatic effect on her, and I think it affected her all her life, and it probably caused her drinking. I hate to use the word boozer, but that's what she was. She could really knock it down. I remember once she and I were going to a party, and a cocktail party, and in the back seat of the limousine, she took out a flask and had a few shots. I says, Lana, we're going to a cocktail party. We'll be there in 10 minutes. She says, yeah, but it's 10 minutes. So she could really put it away, yeah.
Imagine that, a gorgeous star with a possible drinking problem. I'll be damned. You know, whatever effect the death of Lana's father had on her, no one can deny that she did have a knack for picking the wrong men, especially a thug named John Stompanato. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before there was scandal, there was the real-life Cinderella story in which Turner had the starring role. One day, she was a great-looking student at Hollywood High School, and the next, she was the stuff that dreams are made of. Writer Willie Wilkerson explains.
The fact that Lana Turner was discovered at a little soda fountain is absolutely true. The myth, though, that she was discovered at Schwab's is absolutely incorrect. Let me tell you the true story. My father was Billy Wilkerson, the publisher of The Hollywood Reporter, and on a very hot January day in 1937, he walked down to the corner to a little place called the Top Hat Cafe. He sat down at the counter, was sipping a Coke, and noticed this incredibly beautiful young lady. And he called the proprietor of the Top Hat over and said that he would like to meet this young lady. And the proprietor said, sure, I'll effect an introduction. That's exactly what happened. My father introduced himself to the young lady and said, how would you like to be in motion pictures? And her reply was, after a pause, gee, I don't know, I'd have to ask my mother. And the rest, as they say, is history.
And that history included a headline-grabbing scandal that rocked Hollywood at the peak of Lana's career. But for many, the question still remains, who really was holding the knife that killed Lana's underworld Adonis on the night of April 4th, 1958? Was it the star herself or her frightened 14-year-old daughter? And why were there no fingerprints on the knife? More on the bloodbath on Bedford Drive when Mysteries and Scandals returns. If there's one image of Lana Turner that remains, it's her star-making performance in the 1946 film noir classic, The Postman Always Rings Twice. Turner perfectly captured the qualities of the icy-cool, hot-blooded seductress capable of cold-blooded murder. In 1958, that screen image would spill into Lana's real life following the stabbing death of her lover. For years, Lana had laughed off press reports of her scandalous behavior with men. And then she learned you can't laugh off murder. His name was John Stompanato, a name that became famous only in death.
Johnny Stompanato I first knew when he was in Mickey Cohen's gang. Mickey Cohen was the head mobster in California. And Johnny Stompanato, who had been a combat Marine in World War II, when a gambler didn't pay his debt, it was Stompanato went out and beat him up. And he did it quite often. And then he kind of retired from Mickey Cohen's mob, and he became a, what you might say, a resident stud in Beverly Hills. In other words, preying on wealthy widows and divorcees. Lana, of course, was between marriages, and Stompanato was a handsome guy and a very, very virile guy, and she was attracted to him.
But there was another side to virile Johnny, the dangerous side. Lana's longtime makeup artist, Del Armstrong, was an eyewitness.
We didn't know at that time that she was his assignment from the mafia to romance Lana Turner, marry her, and she could make him a producer. He became violent with Lana Turner when she tried to... See, her attention span with men was very short. That's why she had 7 husbands and 70 boyfriends or something. Because once she had him, that's yesterday's mashed potato. You can wrap a fish in. That's what happened with Johnny. One night she just said, well, thank you very much, but we're through, go home. Well, he realized he couldn't go home and face his bosses, and he got very violent. He really worked her over pretty good. Smacked her around, knocked her down, put a pillow over her face. He was going to smother her.
That particular incident happened early in 1958 when Lana was in England co-starring with a then unknown actor named Sean Connery in Another Time, Another Place.
Stompanato beat her up in a hotel room, and Connery threatened to, to wipe out Stompanato, and he probably could have done it. And the London police, believe it or not, expelled Stompanato from the country, made him go back to Hollywood.
Took about three months to finish the picture. She goes to Acapulco after every picture. She goes down and baked in the sun, warms up. She flies to Copenhagen, changes planes, and she's walking down to the first class section, of course. Who is 2 seats? Who's sitting in the seat with Johnny Stompanato? Now you talk about gangsters and people like that knowing and finding out. How did they know that she was going to take that flight?
To the press, they looked like lovebirds on vacation. But in her autobiography, Lana, she painted a much different picture of their time in Mexico. Lana wrote that Stompanato often pointed a gun at her, saying, "Just to remind you that it's loaded and it's aimed at you." Some vacation. Lana's stay in Mexico ended when her agent, Paul Kohner, phoned with news that Lana had received her first Oscar nomination for Best Actress. Lana and Johnny returned to Los Angeles so she could prepare for the ceremonies. It was to be Stompanato's final flight. They were greeted at the airport by the third and final character in Hollywood's great scandal, Lana's 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl. From the very day Cheryl Christine Crane was born on July 25, 1943, Lana and her only child had a troubled relationship.
She did have a tough time with Cheryl giving birth. She labored for 16 to 17 hours.
I think she loved her daughter. I think that there had been nothing in her life to prepare her for being what outsiders would consider a great mother. I think she did the best she could.
Like so many other children of the rich and famous, Cheryl was raised by nannies and educated at boarding schools. But she was frequently trotted out for photo ops to enhance Lana's image.
We found there were many misconceptions we had about each other, misunderstandings we had never talked out. As I started doing the book, I started talking to her for the first time in my life.
That book was Cheryl's 1988 biography, Detour, A Hollywood Story. During promotional interviews, Crane talked about the most difficult part of writing about her infamous childhood.
When you're writing a book, you can't just say, well, this happened and that happened. You have to paint the picture for the reader, so that meant I had to remember details of very, very painful things that I really didn't want to remember.
And the most painful incident occurred in April of 1958 in a scandal that would inspire headlines of murder, jealousy, revenge, and passion that have forever become part of Hollywood's darkest legacy and made the movie star's daughter a household name. But what really happened on that stormy Good Friday night in Turner's bedroom? Did a frightened, abused star take matters into her own hands? Or did a terrified daughter commit a desperate act to save her mother? The truth from the people who were there when Mysteries and Scandals continues.
So I went up and she said, close the door. And she apparently saw in me the one person that she could talk to.
That was then. This is now. You're watching Mysteries and Scandals. I'm A.J. Benza. The Academy Awards ceremony in March of 1958 here at the Pantages Theater marked the high point of Lana Turner's career. It also set the stage for the murder of Johnny Stompanato. Reporter Jim Bacon explains.
She just couldn't be seen with Stompanato in public. She took her press agent, a fellow by the name of Glenn Rose.
She was wise enough to realize that it would be a big public relations mistake on her part to take Johnny Stompanato to the Academy Awards. And she asked if I would take her. And obviously he was very infuriated over that.
Told her, he said, I'm okay in the bedroom, but I'm not okay at the Oscars. And Lana told me at the time that he'd been in a rage for a week ever since that snubbing.
In the bedroom of Lana Turner's newly rented home, Stompanato's rage reached a violent pitch on a rainy April night.
I had a photographer who had a police radio in his car. And he called me up and he says, there's been a murder at such and such an address in Beverly Hills. This was, I'll never forget, it was Good Friday in 1958. And as soon as he gave me the address, I knew right away Stompanato and Lana were shacked up there.
She said she came upstairs and he was still hanging up his clothes. And she said, out. Yeah, you're rude. She was kicking him out again. And this time it was final.
And she said Stompanato had threatened to cut her face up. He says, If you were a man, I would cut your hands off, but you make your living by your face. So I'm going to cut your face up so you won't be able to work again.
Now, Cheryl was in a bedroom just down the hall, in her own bedroom. So she was afraid for Lana's safety.
Cheryl went out in the kitchen, got a butcher knife, just when Stompanato was going to maybe cut up Lana or beat her up badly. Cheryl come out with this knife, and Stompanato was in a rage, and he turned around and he ran right into the knife. The butcher knife went right through him. You could almost see the carpet through him. There was very, very little blood, if any. But he was dead, boy. He was really dead.
The story of what happened immediately after the stabbing of Stompanato goes like this. Cheryl called her father Stephen Crane. Lana called her mother, and she called a doctor. The doctor, unable to revive Stompanato, suggested Lana call herself a really good lawyer. They were all there before anybody called the police. And still, the rumors spread quicker than a brush fire in the Santa Ana winds. Was it really possible that a 14-year-old girl could kill the macho mobster? When Mysteries and Scandals returns, answers to the questions that won't go away. A movie star, a murdered mobster, and a knife-wielding teenager. The perfect cast for a scandal, Hollywood style. Welcome back to Mysteries and Scandals. I'm A.J. Benza. Where were we? Oh, that's right, a dead body in the boudoir of glamorous film star Lana Turner. The police arrived and arrested Lana's 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl Crane. She was charged with the murder of Johnny Stompanato. The weapon, an 8-inch knife, was found in Turner's bathroom, but there were no fingerprints. After a week in juvenile hall, a hearing was held. Because of her age, Cheryl never testified, but her mother did. And everyone agreed it was the role of Lana Turner's lifetime.
And when he dropped, his arms went out, so that I still did not see that there was blood or a wound.
The jury bought Turner's Oscar-worthy performance, and after just 25 minutes, they ruled that the murder of Johnny Stompanato was justifiable homicide. And those who were there that night agreed with the jury.
It's one of the real reasons why I frankly agreed to do this interview, was to try to straighten out that story. There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever that it was Cheryl that did it. And I know the rumor has been rampant for years that Cheryl was taking the rap for Lana. And that's not true. Lana did not do it. That I know.
But I believe the story because it was too soon to make up a story and tell it in such detail to me of exactly how it all happened and what happened.
Even to this day, people believe that Lana killed him, not Cheryl. But I was there that night with Lana, and the truth was that Cheryl had done it. Yeah, just exactly as I described it.
A happy ending to an unhappy story? Not exactly. Cheryl had been cleared of criminal charges, but her fate remained in the hands of a juvenile court judge. He awarded custody of Cheryl to her grandmother.
Lana's mother, Millie, was given physical custody of Cheryl for a point, but Lana had full visitation rights, and Cheryl was never taken away from Lana.
The road for Cheryl was a rough one. The bumps included reform school, drugs, alcohol, arrests, and finally a year-long stay in an institution. And every shrink or counselor who talked with Cheryl agreed that her problems stemmed from that bloody night in April.
For years, I thought of it as my only identity. You know, it was like you would say my name, Cheryl Crane, and immediately everybody go, oh yes, who in 1958? You know, it's been a part of my life ever since it happened. But I've also, let's say, grown up over the years, made a life of my own, had business successes, formed my own identity, learned who I was, that wasn't my only claim to fame.
And Lana got on with her life as well. There were more movies, more men, and more melodrama. But hey, isn't that what we all want from our icons? So sure, maybe she wasn't the best mother or the most considerate friend or even the most faithful wife. but she was a great film star.
Well, in her prime, I've always maintained that Lana Turner was the sexiest woman they ever had on screen. Barring none, even Marilyn Monroe. I thought she had more on the ball than Marilyn from pure sex appeal.
Well, that's my exit cue. I'm A.J. Benza, and I'll see you the next time our paths cross in a state of mind called Hollywood.